Efendim günaydın. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Marmara Belediyeler Birliği'nin çalışkan arkadaşlarımızın tabii yani ben sadece keyfini sürüyorum. Sağınızda solunuzda gördüğünüz benim altın karınca diye nitelediğim olağanüstü arkadaşların ve olağanüstü çalışkan Ceylan hocamızla birlikte İzmir Ekonomi Üniversitesi'nden birlikte hazırladıkları Kent Ağları'nın ikincisine hoş geldiniz. Ben bugün burada sadece süs bitkisi olarak bulunuyorum. Süs bitkisi tabiriyle tercüme yapan arkadaşlara ilk golümü atmış oluyorum böylece. Nasıl tercüme edecekler merak ediyorum. Bakalım. Koray hocamız aslında moderatörlük yapacak. Arkadaşlarımız çift moderatörlük sisteminin yararlı olabileceğini düşündüler. Bir ufak giriş yapmam gerekirse, ben de 1995 yılından beri bir şekilde belediyeci sayılırım. Daha önce de aslında daha çok siyasal düşünceler tarihi konusunda eğitimim oldu. Bu evolution ve revolution, evrim ve devrim kelimelerine acayip derecede takıntılıydım lisans öğrencisi olduğumda. Her genç gibi devrimciydim aslında. Fakat yaş ilerledikçe evrimin daha yararlı olduğuna inanmaya başladım. Şimdi belediyeci olmaya başladıktan sonra da bu siyasal tercihler sebebiyle belediyelerdeki sert dönüşümün tecrübeyle yeni bilgilerin bir araya sağlıklı bir şekilde getirilememesinin zaman zaman nasıl sıkıntılara yol açtığını gördüğüm için o gün bugündür devrimden vazgeçtim, evrimci oldum. Dolayısıyla bu verilerin toplanması, verilerin sağlıklı bir halde işlenmesi ve verilerin aslında hayatta ihtiyaç duyduğumuz şekilde uyarlanabilir hale gelmesi son derece önemli bir hale geldi benim için. Bugün burada çok değerli konuşmacılarımız var. Hem niteliksel hem niceliksel yaklaşımları aslında değerlendirecekler. Şehir mukayesesi biliyorsunuz, şehirle ilgili çalışanların aslında çok rahat çalışamadıkları alanlardan bir tanesidir. Daima pür bilimsel çalışmalar bile olsa muhakkak politik bir yönü aranan, politik bir tarafı olan, öndekilerin ve arkadakilerin birbirlerini yargılamaya çalıştıkları, ondan anlam çıkarmaya çalıştıkları şeyler. Fakat neticede biz artık bir ağlar dünyasında yaşıyoruz. Nerede durduğumuz değil, başkalarına göre nerede durduğumuz, başkalarına göre hangi noktada olduğumuz, başkalarına göre önde mi arkada olduğumuzun da önemi var. Bu çalışmalar, işte buradaki çok değerli yerli yabancı araştırmacılarımızın katkısıyla yapacağımız çalışmalar aslında buna yön veren çalışmalar. Allan, ben, Stefan, welcome. It's a pleasure to see you again. I have yellow cards, by the way. Bana sarı kart vermişler burada. Sanırım süresini aşan arkadaşlara bu sarı kartları göstereceğim. Bunu da peşinden söylemiş olayım. Sanırım bu sarı kartları gördükten sonra herkes süre konusunda biraz daha dikkatli olacaktır. Ben böyle bir giriş yapayım ve Koray hocamıza devredeyim işi. Buyurun hocam.
Cemil Bey, anlaşmadık ama ben 20 dakika verdim zaten şimdiden. 20'şer dakika konuşmacılar için. Siz sarı kartlarınızı ona göre kullanın diye söylüyorum. Peki, o zaman biz hemen başlayalım. Çünkü 12.30, 1,5 saatlik bir vaktimiz var. Salona ve tartışmacılarımıza iyi vakit bırakabilmek adına. Dolayısıyla ilk konuşmacımızdan Profesör Doktor Derudder'den başlamak üzere oturumu başlatıyoruz. Buyurun. Please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And first of all, thanks for having me again. I was here last year, and it's good to be back. So when I was giving the possible topic for this talk, I remember emailing Jaylon and asking, well, if we're going to talk about change, are you actually referring to the changing position of cities, or are you actually talking about a change in research praxis? And she said, well, both. So in that sense, I think my talk about change in the World City Network will actually pertain to both. So what I'll do is I'll briefly talk about change in those two senses. I will at some point talk about change in the research praxis, the way in which we understand cities as part of being a World City Network. But also I'm going to talk a little bit about changing in the ranking, the position and the connectivity of individual cities within those networks. So those are two very different meanings of change, obviously, but I will talk a little bit about both. I will do that towards the end of the presentation, and the reason for that is that first I need to explain a little bit about the context of the research. What is it that we do? And this is needed before I can actually start talking about both change in the research praxis and change in the ranking. So what is that context? Well, that context has been devised in the broader context of a research network, and I think it was already alluded to in one of the introductory talks, that the context is the Globalization and World Cities Research Network, which is a loose organization of individuals trying to understand intercity connections at the global scale. And what I'll do is use some of the methods and results of, amongst others, these two books in which we survey the position of different cities in the global context. Obviously, I will be zooming in on Turkish cities in general and Istanbul in particular, but the idea is that those cities are put into context, and that is the global context of many other cities. So we somehow assess how different cities are interconnected. So the focus is on how Istanbul and other Turkish cities are regionally and globally connected. And when we're going to talk about change, we're going to look at changing ways of thinking about that connectivity and the changing position of Turkish cities. So what is the methodology we use? Because everybody who wants to look at world city networks, connections of cities across the globe, needs some sort of methodology. We need to specify what the network is about, who makes the networks, how you're going to mathematically specify that network, because if you want to measure, if you want to have some sort of data strategy to look at change, you need to somehow specify the network, who makes the network, and so on. Now, one of the things I will emphasize towards the end is that one of the changes in the network praxis is that we see an increasingly broad vision on who the potential networkers are, because obviously there's thousands of network makers. Us as individuals make networks, firms make networks, airlines underscore these networks. So there's a lot of different network makers, each with their different geographies, but if you're going to have an actual measurement, you need to make some sort of choice. And the choice we have made in part of our research is to focus on what we call advanced producer services, APS. So these are firms in management consultancy, accountancy, financial services, advertising. Clearly that's just one network maker, but we focus on those network makers because advanced producer service firms facilitate other agents networking. So they facilitate people and firms to connect across the globe, and by doing so, they have office networks across the globe. And this advertisement really shows you this. Deloitte, which is like a typical APS provider, has an advertisement on Schiphol Airport in Amsterdam where it says, "Fortunately, all capitals in the world have one thing in common." And what is that one thing they have in common? They have Deloitte. So the implicit message is here, well, we're clearly in Amsterdam, we're clearly in New York, and so on. And so what we're actually going to do is use that kind of information to specify, based on the location strategies of these firms, many firms in many cities, how networks are being made. So what we're going to do is, well, this is another APS, AMROP Heaver in Human Resources. These dots are the locations of the offices of the different firms. So if you look at Australia, they have two offices in Melbourne and Sydney. They have one in Auckland. And what we're actually going to do is use this kind of information to look at which cities they are located and use that information to somehow derive proxy, guesstimate, intercity connections. We're going to look at locations of many such firms, but we're going to do two extra things. We're going to value the dots, so not every office is born equal. You have headquarters, you have regional headquarters, so not every firm or every office is equally important. And the second and most important step is we're going to infer networks, because you don't see a network here. You see dots, locations on the map, and that method is used, it's called the interlocking network model, and what we basically assume is that if two offices of a firm are in two different cities, that opens up the possibility of exchange of capital, information, and knowledge. So what do? We assume that intercity connections can be proxied, can be guessed based on the shared presence of APS firms in cities. As mentioned, we value this from 0 to 5. 0 means an office is not in a city. 5 means you have the global headquarters. And then there's this one formula which I won't explain in detail, but that's the actual connectivity measure. City diet connectivity between two cities A and I for firm J. We simply multiply the importance of the measure. So if you have a global headquarters in New York, a regional headquarters in London, you get a city diet connectivity of 5 times 4, 20. That value doesn't have an intrinsic meaning, but it means 20 is larger than 15. So that's the idea. If you do this for a lot of firms, a lot of cities, you add this up, you have an impression for a city's connectivity at the global level. You can look at the geographies of those connectivities at the regional level, the national level, and so on. So in 2018, we have done this for 170 firms and 707 cities. This kind of summarizes, this is some of the work I've done in the past with Stefan. So what you do is, for instance, this is for McKinsey, another APS firm. You have the different locations. You use this to somehow infer connections between cities. And then you look at the map and you see which cities are more central, which city connections are more central. This is for one firm. If you add this up for many firms, this is a kind of messy map from another paper with Stefan we have, where you look not only, and this is the point, you cannot only look at how well a city is connected, but also where it is connected. So if you look at North America, for instance, you see a lot of well-connected cities, but you also see that most of those connections have a national dimension. Most US cities are connected within the US. And in the east board, you see, for instance, New York and Boston, who have much more global connections. And this is actually our framework of measurement. So before going to the actual topic of change, I'll give you some intuitive results. You can have a lot of different results based on that. I'm not going to go into detail, but somehow to set the scene, what you can have based on this is the first measure you can have is what we call global network connectivity. How many connections do you have? So that's the first measure. We express this as a percentage. And so what you see is based on 170 firms and cities being connected to 706 other cities is that London and New York are the most connected cities in the office networks of APS firms. They're quite far ahead beyond the other cities. And then you clearly see a shift in the global economy, because if you look at the top 15, if we did this exercise in 2000, you saw mostly North American and European cities, but you clearly see the shift towards Pacific Asia, with Hong Kong, Beijing, Singapore, Shanghai, Sydney being ranked above Paris, for instance. So if we look at the position of Turkish cities then, I've put these two, on the right of the slide with the ranking in the World City Network. It clearly shows that Istanbul is by far the most connected global gateway in Turkey. It's ranked 31st. And if you look at the other Turkish cities, they're quite far behind, with Ankara and Izmir almost being on par, and Bursa the only city that has a connectivity above 10%. I put these 4 cities in bold because the other Turkish cities actually are too poorly connected to actually make a meaningful analysis of the regional dimension. This is only based on 2 or 3 offices of different firms, and this is too idiosyncratic to interpret. So I will focus on Istanbul, Ankara, Izmir, and Bursa as I continue. This is another measure, globalism, and what globalism actually is the average connectivity to the 10 most connected cities in the world. So it means if you have a positive value, you're really well connected to New York, London, and so on. So it's a relative measure. If you have a negative score, it means not that you're not connected, but it means you're more poorly connected than you would expect based on your overall connectivity. So it's a relative measure. So what you see, for instance, is that the ranking slightly shifts. What you see, for instance, number 1 is Palo Alto. That's not on any of the different rankings normally. Palo Alto is not very well connected overall, but the connections it does have tends to be with New York, tends to be with London, tends to be with Beijing, tends to be with Shanghai. So it's very strategic in that sense. Okay? So if you look at Turkey now, there's only one city that has major globalism, and it's Istanbul, and the other one have negative values. Negative values, once again, meaning they're not very well connected to the key global cities. You know? Istanbul, on the other hand, is quite well strategically connected to the Londons, the Shanghais, and so on. One final result before going to change is what we call regionalism. What you see on this radar diagram is the same kind of measure where you look at the geography of connections, because two cities with the same connectivity can be connected to different parts of the world. We use world regions here. You can do it at a national scale. There's many ways in which you could carve this up, but we used world regions. The idea is the more you're outward in the radar diagram, the stronger your connections are. The more it goes to the center, the poorer your connections are. So if you look at the 4 cities, one of the things that strikes for Istanbul and for the other Turkish cities is the quite strong connections to both Eurasia and Europe. So you're well connected on average to European cities, and there's always a very big dip to Pacific Asia. So there's, on average, poor connections to Pacific Asia, to major Chinese cities and other cities in Pacific Asia. Once again, that doesn't mean there are no connections, but these tend to be, on average, based on the overall connectivity, much less important than expected. So this is the case for most of the Turkish cities. The only thing that makes Istanbul stand out here is the only Turkish city that is well connected to Northern America. Okay, so this is an exception. So, going to change then. What has been changing in the research praxis? One of the things that has been changing is, well, we have been doing this work for 15 years now, and obviously it's a very small part of the urban economy. If you look at the Istanbul economy, how much do producer services contribute to that? It will be a small portion, actually. So you focus on networks from a very specific perspective, and there's all sorts of agents that aren't measured. So one of the changes in the research praxis over the years has been, not just in our research, but in research more broadly, is that people start looking at other agents, other network makers that make other geographies. Okay? So one of the changes in the research praxis has been looking at different network makers and looking at how the global map changes. So this is actually the same picture I've shown you before as APS firms. And you need to use your geographical imagination here. This is a world map. To the left or to the west, you see Northern America and then Latin America. You can clearly see the shape of the continent. Then you go to Europe and so on. And these rectangles are city codes with a 2-letter code. So if you look at the 2 black rectangles standing out, NY and LN, that's New York and London. So the darker the color, the more connectivity. That's the same map. So this is our map of global connectivity. But what is the change? We actually start looking at other network makers. It's not just Deloitte that makes the World City Network. You have very different agents with very different geographies. And I'm going to show you 2. The first one is NGOs. So it's a totally different network maker. Non-governmental organizations, they organize like APS firms. The Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, they also have an office network of sorts. And what you see is some similarities and differences. Once again, you see New York and Washington, but the map looks much more decentered, with obviously much more cities in the periphery showing up. So for instance, one of the 2 key nodes in this respect are Nairobi. If you look at Africa, NR and KM, Kathmandu, are 2 global hubs of cities where NGOs organize their operations and affairs. So what you see, one of the research changes has been to look at other network makers. I'm not advancing, focusing on NGOs. The point is simply you can look at your network maker of preference, what you're interested in as a city, and you can start looking whether you're on and off the map for that specific process. And then a final example, maritime APS firms. These are still APS firms, but they specialize in maritime economies. So for instance, if you're talking about insurance, you have specific insurance for the maritime industry, Lloyd's for instance. And what you see is that you don't need to be a maritime city to be a maritime world city. London and New York are back on there, but you see some changes, for instance. If you look at this region, Istanbul is on the map, but if you look at the very central dot rectangle on this map, you see PI, and that's actually in Greece, Piraeus. All of a sudden, a city like Piraeus, which is normally secondary to the World City Network in terms of maritime business organization, it's a major node where important firms show up. So the first thing I wanted to say in terms of the change of the research praxis is that we see an increasing shift towards other network makers where you actually need to have different maps with different networks. You overlay them and you get a multiplex vision of where cities are actually located. And then the final point I want to make in terms of change is the second meaning of change. How does the position of cities change? What we've done, therefore, is look at some of our different data cuts, because what I presented earlier on was for 2018, but we have been doing this research for a while now. We started in 2000, and we do the exact same thing until now, and because we do the exact same thing, the same data sets or sort of data, same methodology, you can actually look because you look through the same lens, you can actually look at change in cities rather than change in methodologies. And what we have here is a measure of change, connectivity change, that is once again relative. So it means relative to the rest of the distribution. And we have the 15 cities in the World City Network that have gained most connectivity between 2010 and 2018. I guess unsurprisingly what you see, these are almost all Chinese cities. They're not all Chinese cities because at number 8, for instance, you see Doha. But what you see is that most Chinese cities are more and more involved in the office networks of key APS firms, with some other cities showing up as well, for instance, Harare and Dhaka. How are Turkish cities doing in this context? What you see is that between 2010 and 2018, there has been a consistent progress. If you can talk about progress, well, connectivity gains in across the 4 major Turkish cities, well, major from the perspective of the World City Network. So this is a relative measure. Once again, this does not only mean that they have gained more connectivity, they actually have even gained more connectivity than the rest of the world. So what you see is that they have been up, the rankings have been rising. Istanbul has been the 75th most rising city, but that means actually that in 2010 it was ranked about 40th, now it's ranked 31st. So most of the Turkish cities are actually changing their connectivities in the sense that they become more and more globally connected. So, in sum, 2 perspectives on change in World City Network research, more and more looking at different network makers. I've just presented 3. We can start imagining all sorts of other networks, making overlays. And the second perspective is that we now, because we have been doing this research for a while, can actually start looking at change in the position of cities. And this is what has been happening, not just in our research, but more generally over the past couple of years. I hope I was within time. Thanks a lot for your attention. Okay.
Çok teşekkürler. Cemil Bey, size ihtiyaç kalmadı galiba. Evet, zamanda gidiyoruz. Şimdi ikinci konuşmacımızı ben takdim etmek istiyorum. Doktor Allan Watson'ın konuşmasını dinleyeceğiz. Şimdi bir başka perspektiften. Lütfen.
Okay, so let me begin by saying thank you to MMU and to Ceylan for the invitation. It's great to be back in Istanbul. We should have some slides, hopefully. Thank you very much. So Ben has spoken about the quantitative work for which the Globalization and World Cities Research Network is most well known. But there's another strand to Gork's work, which is qualitative research, which is perhaps less prominent, but nevertheless very, very important. And so I want to introduce that a little bit today. Gork's qualitative legacy, which, as I say, is less well known. But it's interesting if you look back to the first edition of World City Network, published by Peter Taylor. He makes it very clear that he saw the quantitative analysis as a way of understanding pattern in the World City Network, but that quantitative analysis was very much there to give context for more intensive, more in-depth, more grounded qualitative studies of intercity processes. And Gork has actually a very enviable track record of qualitative research on world cities. And in fact, if we go back to the origins of Gork back in 2000, the report on the left here was a comparative study of London and Frankfurt, which was based on semi-structured interviews across the 2 cities. But it would be the quantitative analysis around Peter's model that would become to dominate Gork's research from then on. The qualitative legacy of Gork has in many ways been led by the work of Professor Jonathan Beaverstock, who is in some ways kind of the forgotten co-founder of Gork behind Peter's work. So John is now at the University of Bristol, and along with other colleagues, including James Falconbridge of Lancaster and Sarah Hall at Nottingham, I've undertaken many years of qualitative research focusing on areas such as skilled labour mobility, business travel, economic clustering, learning, innovation, communities of practice. And that includes advanced producer service firms, so banking, law, advertising, but it's broadened out to include work in which Ben has been involved on international business travel, on executive search, and including my own research on creative industries also. Just a couple of quick examples, since part of the theme of the conference today is visualization, is just to pick up on trying to get some sense of that qualitative data. So we've got two examples here, one of which is from John's work back in the mid-2000s, looking at investment bankers. And this shows the career mobility of a particular investment banker as they move across the world as part of their career. And you can see, for example, this particular person joined RBS in London, has travelled to New York, Singapore, Tokyo, Frankfurt. On the right-hand side is a similar example, and this is taken from my work with John on creative industries, and this tracks the movement of creative practitioners as they move and freelance as part of temporary creative projects, so much more ephemeral forms of movement. Now, this looks very pretty, but also there's an important point behind this, which is it's not just about looking at people's career movements, but they and where they move to, but understanding why they move to particular places, and importantly, how their skills and knowledges and expertise move and flow through the world city networks. Now, we may be able to get some of that data quantitatively, but through interviewing these people, understanding the decisions behind those movements, the reasons behind those movements, we can begin to understand how that knowledge moves through the world city network. And this takes me to a recent piece of work. So late last year, Michael Hoyler, Christoph Palmreiter, and I published an edited collection, a bit of a plug here, called Global City Makers. And we published this book with the aim of kind of, I guess, bringing qualitative approaches to researching the World City Network back to the fore, to identify and develop a renewed research agenda for world cities based around qualitative research. So our premise is in many ways begins from the same place as the quantitative research. We think of global cities as being places in which the world economy is managed and controlled, but we think about that particularly in terms of practices of advanced producer service firms, and more specifically, the practices of the professionals that are operating within those firms. And we identify those individuals as what we call global city makers, the people who do the work of making global cities. In the prologue to the book, Saskia Sassen talks about the global city function as being made. It's as a process which is complex, a process which is multifaceted. And in the book that we argue, in order to get at that complexity, you need to develop qualitative approaches to understand those practices that constitute globalization and global control. So in short, we need to better understand the agency of those individuals and their actual practices of management and control that they exercise. That's to say, how world city networks are brought into being, how global cities are made, how global city networks are made. And so the quantitative studies which Ben has introduced have been extremely important and valuable in telling us a lot about the patterning of globalization and how that patterning has changed over time, but don't have much to contribute in terms of thinking about processes or practices which look at things, for example, like why certain economic processes are located and performed in particular cities and not others, why the changes in connectivity that Ben has identified are taking place, what's behind those changes, and importantly, if we talk about intercity flows, intercity networks, what is the content and meaning of those flows? So in the book, we seek to identify this renewed critical agenda for global cities research, and that has 4 particular elements which I'd like to run through quickly. The first of which is to bring research on world city networks and research in economic geography into closer dialogue. So for a long time, economic geographers have been concerned with agency, and they've been concerned with practice as part of their relational approach. And the World City Network approach is also relational, but it's been less concerned with agency and practice. So we want to bring issues of agency and practice to the fore. We're particularly interested here in how different cultures of doing business may lead to a variety of different outcomes in and across different cities. So, of course, the assumption behind the quantitative work is that practices are generally homogenous on a global level, and the links between offices have exactly the same function or purpose or meaning, when actually, of course, the situation in reality is much more nuanced than that, and the behaviours and practices that underpin cities as being global aren't identical in every city or in every firm, but retain unique differences, and it's important to understand what those differences are. And Saskia Sassen talks about the global city as having a distinct urban knowledge, as being places of distinct urban knowledge capital that are specific to particular cities and their different mix of conditions and knowledges and experiences. And we argue that only through qualitative research can we begin to understand that. The second part of this renewed agenda is to, in some way, recover the critical intentions of early world city research, in particular thinking about power and how cities and the classes within cities achieve control over other cities and other regions. I think it's important to note here that the practices that I've spoken about are intentional, yeah, and they are value-laden. They serve distinct purposes. And if we think about advanced producer service firms, for example, they are related to the management and governance of their clients' commodity chains. And so the relations between APS firms and their end clients are embedded into and serve these hierarchical relations which the APS firms' clients maintain through their production networks. The third element, and Ben has already touched on this, is a need to recognise the diversity of actors involved in global city making. And in the book, we try to include a number of different case studies, both APS and otherwise. But as Ben's touched on, the importance of actors in sectors other than APS must not be overlooked. So economic practices and strategic decision-making are embedded in wider economic, social and political relations, each with their own sets of critical actors. So one, for example, might be the role of city mayors and city governance in promoting and developing and making the global city. And I think also, as well, it's really important that we challenge the privileging of elite labour in the narrative of global cities. And we need to think about agency also as it relates to the division between skilled and unskilled labour. So, for example, Saskia Sassen talks about the role of low-skilled labour in maintaining the strategic infrastructure that supports high-income talent. But much of the global cities research to date has privileged that elite labour. And then finally, the fourth one, which I think is really important to know, is in the book we try and challenge teleological notions of global city making, this desire to make the global city as a project, and to think about the fact that the practices of these actors can make global cities, but in some cases can also unmake global cities. And so global city making processes can be disruptive. So a good example might be Ben's work on Reykjavik, for example, where they look at the demise of Reykjavik as a global banking centre immediately following the global crisis. And Darius Vojic of the University of Oxford, for example, in a 2013 paper, talks about the dark side of nylon and the fact that those two cities formed a powerful axis and that the global financial crisis was rooted within that axis. And the key actors here were regulatory bodies, industrial lobbying associations, that would actually act to unmake some global cities, especially Reykjavik. Okay, so just to close then, those four elements we see as crucial parts of a renewed agenda, a more critical agenda, potentially a more progressive social and economic agenda for studying global cities focused around agency and practice. I think it's important to note that at this point that we see qualitative research as very much kind of complementary to the quantitative approaches, not as a kind of either or, but as taken together. And then the idea is that qualitative research can complement the quantitative results, maybe refine those quantitative results, and in some cases also, I think, challenge those results.
Üçüncü konuşmacımızı dinlemek istiyoruz şimdi de. Doçent Doktor Aslı Ceylan Öner. Buyurunuz.
Merhaba. Benim de slaytları bir süre eklemem gerekecek herhalde.
Çok hızlı anons ediyoruz. Araya hiç girmiyoruz. Evet. Ondan oluyor.
Tamam, geldik.
Peki ben size daha fazla süre bırakmak için buyurunuz.
Okay. Again, good morning. Actually, I would like to tell my association with the GOK Scholars Band and Stefan, Allan are all part of, since my graduate education, my PhD years, I've been working with the GOK as Peter Taylor and John Beaverstock and other scholars. Saskia Sasson was also one of my professors when I was at the London School of Economics. So since then, I'm very much involved with globalization. And Ben showed this Deloitte advertisement where, wherever you go, Deloitte has an advertisement, exactly the same advertisement, but there the buildings were different. So that's where we come in. That's where the architects come in, what is happening, like how the world cities are connected and what is the role of architecture. And with that, I specifically focus on the high-rises for the reasons that I'm going to explain. And I'm going to show how high-rises and building higher to house the global flows as actually transforming the urban space. And I'm going to do this in the context of Istanbul and the role of global architecture firms. So building higher has been important for the mankind all throughout the years. Loretta Lee says that this, in a world of rapidly accelerating global flows, architecture actually is an important way of anchoring different identities and constructing material connection between people and places. So architecture has kind of this role of really contextualizing things in the physical sense in terms of global flows. And related to that, McNeill also says that in terms of the built environment architecture, skyscrapers, they always played a role in terms of how the financial and political elite actually represent their approaches about their cities to create a projected self-consciousness for the city. So both of these things actually contextualize my presentation, these quotes, in the best way possible. So what we are doing is, like, as architects to house the global flows, actually we are focusing on building imaginative landscapes. But, well, there's another issue to that. I'm not saying that this is the only way, because globalization has both sides and there are people who are suffering also. But mostly what city governments are trying to do is, like, they're trying to build imaginative landscape to house the global flows. So here you see images from Miami downtown, London Canary Wharf, Paris La Défense. Yeah, they are all different buildings, but the idea is the same: to have star architects, to build higher, and to have this urban glamour zone. So in a way, globalization has resulted in the remaking of the built environment to attract this global flows of capital and elite. Sasson also talks about this. So nowadays, central business districts, skylines, waterfront developments, a lot of mixed-use centers have become characteristic elements of global cities. Among these, skyscrapers, I'm not going to say high-rises anymore, skyscrapers, and I'm going to define that later, they really demand a special focus, because these are mostly new buildings. And to house the global flows, a new technology is needed, a new infrastructure is needed, so these are well-grounded. They're also iconic landmarks. Also, when you talk about a high-rise, you think about like buildings that house a lot of expertise and people together at once. So this is in tune with the agglomeration need of the service sector. The specific lifestyle demand of the global elite also demands the high rises. They like it in a way, and governments also like it. So in order to attract the high-rise construction, they relax the planning controls. We see that in La Défense, we see that in Canary Wharf, we see that in Istanbul. So both Ben and Allan talked about these transnational corporations, APS, Advanced Producer Services, and they also talked about alternatives. There is another alternative maybe we can look at in the GOG data, which is called Global Intelligence Corps. Actually, this term was first coined by Rimmer in 1991, then picked up by Chris Olds in 2001. These are the firms which are elite global architecture, planning, engineering, and design consultancy firms. So those are the star architects, star design firms that do construction globally. They're also global by themselves. The reason that we need GIC, or Global International Corps, is that transnational corporations, they also invest and develop property both in foreign and domestic markets, and they need support. They get the support from the real estate development firms, which are global, like Jones Long LaSalle, DTZ, CB Richard Ellis, but they also need actual construction firms, actual design firms. In that sense, design is very important, and I'm privileging design in my presentation, not because I'm an architect, but design is the important aspect of creating imaginative landscapes. So the result becomes like high-rise buildings in different cities are undertaken by same designers, or like many similar designers, and also urbanization is becoming more and more interdependent in global cities. So with that, I would like to focus on Istanbul. As you know, we have this new airport, and this tower designed by Nicholas Grimshaw has become the symbol of building higher and global connectivity of Istanbul. Istanbul has had many high-rises. Some of them are in the form of towers, individual towers. Some of them are in they are complexes of commercial offices. Some of them, like the new recent ones that I'm going to be talking about, have everything, mixed use. But the other kind that it's kind of shocking to me is like it's both like the one that you see, the development that you see here, like highlighted with yellow. It's both high-rise and it's also like horizontal. So it's like a city citadel, city within a city. So those are the kinds of developments that we see in Istanbul. By 2015, Istanbul had 5 million square meters of retail office space, around 7 million square meters of grade A commercial office space, which is actually sevenfold of what it had in 2005. So between 2005 and 2019, there was like 7 times increase in the grade A office space in Istanbul. Jones Long LaSalle has actually very good reports that they have published about Istanbul, and this is one of them. Here they have highlighted the office market hotspots, grade A office market hotspots, and the red blob that you see here is the CBD. CBD is like this area that has Şişli, Mecidiyeköy, Zincirlikuyu, Levent, Maslak area, and it has 2 million square meters of grade A office space. But on the other hand, they have highlighted 4 other hotspot locations for grade A office development, which has an additional 1.8 million square meters of office space just on the European side. But the real shock, they also say that it's not the European side, but it's the Asian side. In Asian side, there are 8 other hotspots that have been delineated by JLL, and they have 4 million square meters of grade A office space. So in total, Istanbul has 7 million. Well, looking at this, okay, there are a lot of things happening in Istanbul. The urbanization through GICs is becoming interdependent. So I wanted to look at how these GICs and their constructions are becoming prominent in Istanbul. What do they mean for Istanbul? So for that, I turned to Emporis database, which is, probably most of you know, it's the world's largest database of high-rise buildings. High-rise buildings are 35 meters or over. Skyscrapers are buildings 100 meters or over. Since I'm looking at this imaginative urban landscapes, I focused on skyscrapers. Emporis lists buildings with certainty of the height. So in terms of the buildings that with a height certainty, there are 161 skyscrapers in Istanbul. But if we look at the buildings that also have height uncertainty and cancelled proposals, there are around 477 skyscrapers. I'm not talking about high rises. So in terms of that, in the global scale, Istanbul falls into the numbers 22, just above Beijing. 4 of these cities are from North America, like a couple of them, there's Moscow from Europe, the others are from Asia, and 10 of them are from China. So within that list, Istanbul has a pretty good place in terms of the, I mean, pretty good, I say it in quotation, in terms of the number of high rises. So if you look at that 400, I forgot number, 77 buildings and their distribution, around 392 of them are existing. So we have 392 existing skyscrapers in Istanbul, and 37 of them are designed by transnational architectural firms. There are 31 buildings that are proposed but unbuilt because of their sheer scale, or it might be because they didn't fit some of the guidelines of the local governments. There were some lawsuits, but the percentage of it is pretty high. 22 of those 31 were not built, were designed by Global Intelligence Corps, which are transnational architecture firms. And there are buildings under construction and planned. So in terms of the existing skyscrapers in the completion years, here you see according to the years of 5-year intervals, throughout the years they have increased dramatically. And in each year there's a small percentage of it that is built by GICs. But the biggest percentage actually is between 2000 and 2004. This is the completion year. This means that these were planned 10 years before at least. So the year between 2000 to 2004 were planned around 1990s. And this was the time that the communist bloc failed. And at that time, Istanbul became, or the plans were like Istanbul is going to become an important financial center for the Middle East, combining Europe and Middle East together. So from that point on, there were a lot of construction efforts that started. For example, the buildings that you see, the completion years, the last ones, 2015 and 2019, 2010, 2014, they were planned around 2000, year 2000. And this was the time that Istanbul's global city status was really strengthening. And the map actually showed, the firms that kind of came to Istanbul for the design, and New York-based firms and London-based firms had the upper hand. So among the 37 buildings designed by global intelligence corporations, 27 are on the European side, all of which are located within the CBD borders that you see with the red blob. So CBD has a lot of expansion. On the other hand, 9 of them were located in the Ataşehir Kozyatağı subcenter. That is the CBD of the Anatolian side. The developments, I mean, most of you from Istanbul probably know it better than I do, but that part is developing really fast. The earliest skyscraper in Anatolia goes back to 2012, indicating that the developments in Anatolian side is fairly recent, and a lot of buildings are mixed use. So in terms of the inventory of skyscrapers, the existing skyscrapers, Skyline Residence and Office Tower in Şişli, designed by Broadway and Malyan Limited in London, is has the tallest tower in Istanbul. 284 meters. Ironically, the second tallest tower is located in the Ataşehir, Kozyatağı Ataşehir, the second CBD that I talked about in the Anatolian side. It's the Metropole Tower. It's 280 meters. It's not much shorter than the Skyland residence. And the Sapphire Tower that we all see very commonly in Levant is designed by a Turkish global GIC, I would say, Tabanlıoğlu Architects, and also Alimak Hek Group from Stockholm also helped in terms of the construction. There are other buildings that are under construction, not many, but London-based architecture firms are taking the upper hand, and we also see SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, which is a very important company in terms of the skyscraper design all throughout the world, is also designing buildings in Istanbul. The highest building that is under construction is in the MR Square in Çamlıca. It's the Address Hotel and Residences. It's a mixed-use hotel and residence building. It's designed by Norman Foster, who is a very important star architect. The second one is Fako Tower. It's in Levant, it's Central Business District, designed by SOM. So these two names are here, very important names. And then John McCaslin and Partners and Arup Associates of London are designing the third highest building that is under construction. There are planned skyscrapers that are approved, but not yet started to be constructed, like Torunlar Garden Tower and Nurol Çağlayan Tower. In terms of the unbuilt skyscrapers, there were 22. 17 of them were in the European CBD. And these were like very ambitious proposals. That's why maybe they didn't get done. The most ambitious proposal of all was the Three Empires project. It was 600 meters. It was going to be among the tallest buildings of the world. It was going to be in Zeytinburnu. It was announced in 2002. And actually, a DC-based firm, Edifice International, was going to take the lead on that, but the Belgium division was going to take the lead, but somehow the project just went, it disappeared, and only this image remained. I couldn't find any other images. This is the tallest tower. It also had 3 more towers, and everything that you can think of in terms of the function was integrated. Maybe the most important unbuilt proposal of the skyscraper was the Dubai Towers International, which is around 400 meters. The tallest tower was 400 meters. It started to be pronounced in 2005 when the Sheikh Al Maktoum of Dubai visited Istanbul and said that they wanted to do something. But the building proposed was in a public land, and there were lawsuits with the Chamber of Architects. So this is an SOM, Skidmore, Owings and Merrill rendering, and then the project was put on hold. So this was the inventory. So in terms of conclusion, I can say what we have learned. So I can say, or I identified 3 episodes of building higher in Istanbul. The first episode was, this is the planning, the first half of the 1990s. That's when I say after the collapse of the communist bloc, and Istanbul was becoming the important global city of Balkans and Middle East. And here we see like İşbank Towers, Tekfen Towers, Metro City Towers, Garanti Bank Tower, Garanti Bank Plaza, all designed by American-based firms, helped by Turkish partners, mostly Tekeli and SİSA partnership. And this was the first wave. The second episode started around the beginning of 2000s, and this was when the World City status was strengthening. So the Canyon project, the Sapphire project, the ambitious proposals of Three Empires Tower, Dubai Towers International, all came about during this time. And in terms of the third episode, this is around 2010. During this time, Istanbul has gained many tall buildings, not only skyscrapers. There are around 5,500 tall buildings in Istanbul. This image on the left is the European CBD. The image on the right is the Kozyatağı, the Anatolian CBD. So after this time, Istanbul became a truly polycentric city, and firms that design in Istanbul really increased in terms of the representation of the countries. Just to sum up and finish, so what does it mean for global intelligence corporations, architectural design firms, and Istanbul? In all 3 episodes, GIC architecture firms and their star architects played an important role in terms of the creating the imaginative landscapes. European CBD received majority of construction by GICs, but infrastructure remained to be a sensitive topic because of densification. I want to just show one thing here, You see especially the SOM's rendering in Fako Tower and Çiftçi Tower's rendering. They are all on the central business district, which is very dense. But it is imaged, or it is rendered as like it is in a very spacious area. That's like there is a book lying with statistics, I guess. That's, as architects, we also like to kind of not lie, but kind of perform an image that is going to be more appealing. So these kind of images. So there's actually densification, but these images show that the towers are in a very spacious environment. Actually, they are not. They're in a very dense environment. Sorry, I have to go to that. So Istanbul CBD is not Canary Wharf, is not La Défense, is very much larger with sub-districts. So in terms of that, we can question the coherent architectural language there. Istanbul's high-rise and skyscraper clusters are scattered both in European and Asian side. So there might be many CBDs in waiting, and this might mean some things for the real estate industry. Certainly, the global know-how of star architects was shared with Turkish architecture firms, and of course, like there was a lot of knowledge sharing, but the question of the context can also be placed into question. So who's designing for which context is also an issue. Istanbul has many skyscrapers, and definitely they crafted a new identity, but their sheer scale, size, and number actually kind of created the image of an overly ambitious global city image that is dependent on real estate. So what other industries can we bring to Istanbul for its future development is a question as well. A lot of these, like the developers, use the global names like Daniel Libeskin, Norman Foster, SOM in their brochures for marketing strategies, and it did work. A lot of foreign investors, they were attracted. A lot of TNCs were attracted. So in terms of that, in a way, they managed to kind of attract the global flows to Istanbul. And we'll see how the later years will go. So thank you.
Konuşmacımıza da çok teşekkürler. Şimdi bir genel değerlendirme zamanı. Dolayısıyla biz iki tartışmacımıza dönmek istiyoruz şimdi. Öncelikle Stefan Heinemann'dan bir değerlendirme isteyeceğim. Daha sonra da Eda Ünlü Yücesoy'dan bir değerlendirme isteyeceğim. Buyurun.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. I'm honored to be involved in this panel here, and thanks for the presentation. Yeah, it's a really good wrap-up of all the things that happened the last 20 years, actually, in the globalization and world city network research. And Ben highlighted the impressive development this field from an academic perspective has made. And from my perspective, it was absolutely necessary to have these changes being tackled by academia, but also by decision makers, because in the early days it was like everyone was keen on being on top of the leaderboard. No one really cared about how these figures have been collected, how these figures have been assembled, how these figures have been tweaked. And this is, Jalen, you took the metaphor of how to lie with statistics. It's like this. And this is why it is very valuable and very important to also involve qualitative aspects, because they can be used for us quantitative guys to qualify the linkages. So it is really impressive that Alan took us on his tour of how he tackles the the structures of global networks, because they are made by the people, not by the organization. And it is very important to be able to follow those individual careers and to aggregate them on a higher level, and then in the next step, Ben and me, as quantitative-oriented researchers, can be sure that that our idea of how to mathematically conceptualize the networks, that this is solid, and this is at the end of the day producing the right tables that you decision makers can at the end of the day use to promote your city development. And this is where Jalen's impressive presentation came into play. It's like a physical representation of the capital flows, which all the positive and negative aspects in it. And at the end of the day, it is the landmark character of architecture that you can also use to engage people globally. But on the other hand, from a sociology perspective, you probably may also think of that all this dynamics, all this capital inflows, with the consequences of raising higher buildings, improving or increasing the height of the buildings, that this always comes at the expense of shifting people that were historically in that areas, that were historically involved in these processes on an intra-city level. So from my perspective, very coherent presentations that showed that this shift in research and a different view and different angles on the same topic are very helpful, and at the end of the day, without alternative.
Evet. Eda Hocam, sizden de bir değerlendirme alalım.
Çok teşekkürler. Ben de çok güzel 3 konuşma ve bir yorum dinledim. Çok teşekkürler öncelikle. Bu niceliksel çalışmaların üzerine niteliksel nasıl araştırmalar yapıldığı ve onların da aslında mekansal yansımalarını görmüş olduk. Çok güzel bir üçleme olmuş. Bu küresel şehir ağlarını nasıl çalışabiliriz, konuya nasıl yaklaşabiliriz için. Tabii şehirler birbirine bağlanıyormuş gibi görünüyor. Sanki hani şehirler bunu yapıyormuş gibi bazen düşünülse de aslında bu işte küresel sermaye akışları, çeşitli ekonomik süreçlerle oluşan bir şehirler sisteminde ve şehirler ağında yeni ağlar da ortaya çıkıyor ki son araştırmaları da bunu gösteriyormuş. Ben çok sivil toplum kuruluşları üzerine olan Nairobi ve Katmandu'nun öne çıktığı araştırmaları da çok aslında önemli buluyorum. Çünkü sadece ekonomik açıdan küresel merkezde yer alan ya da ağların merkezinde yer almak değil, çeşitli alternatif ağların içinde de yer alan yeni merkezlerin oluşumu ve bunları izlemek de o kadar önemli. Ben Derudder konuşurken aklıma mesela eğitim, yüksek eğitim, çünkü artık öğrencilerin de hareketi ve akademisyenlerin hareketi de fazlalaştı ve sağlık geldi. Özellikle son yıllarda İstanbul'un bu konuda belki Kore ile birlikte, Seul ile birlikte artan bir ağırlığı oldu. Bunlar hepsi tabii çok ilginç çalışmalar olarak ortaya çıkıyor. Mekansal olarak da evet, gökdelenlerin sayısı ve aslında bizim klasik İstanbul'un yapısında Avrupa yakası, Anadolu yakası olarak ayırdığımız merkezi iş alanının yapısı da hızla değişiyor. Bunu da görmek çok ilginçti. Tabii binalar, gökdelenler, yıldız mimarlar öne çıktıkça bu yeni teknolojik sistemler de gündeme geliyor ve çeşitli sertifikalar gündeme geliyor. Özellikle işte akıllı binalar, yeşil binalar, kendi kendine aslında her şeyi düşünebilen binalarla donatılıyoruz bir şekilde ve bunlar aslında gündelik hayatımıza giriyor. Ve bu da aslında pratiklerin nasıl, aslında küresel pratiklerin nasıl tekrar bir şekilde niteliksel olarak araştırılabileceğine geliyor ki bence de çok ilginç konular olabilir. Ben de diğer tartışmacıyla birlikte aynı görüşleri paylaşıyorum. Yerel yönetimler için küresel ağlardaki bir şehre sahip olmak çok önemli. Yani çeşitli ekonomik, kültürel, sosyal açılardan bu işte yönetim, karar alma, bir tür merkezde yer almanın ne kadar önemli olduğunu hepimiz biliyoruz. Bu tür şehirlerde yaşamak da, yani bu tür şehirlerin yaşayanı olmak da çok önemli olmaya başladı ki bu şehirler en çok göç akımlarında alan şehirler haline gelmeye başlıyor. Ki bu da aslında başka bir katman olarak bu tür hani küresel şehirlere ekleniyor. Tabii üçüncü şeyde hepimiz burada referans verdik. Sase'nin üçüncü en önemli hani küresel şehirlerin özelliği olarak toplumsal kutuplaşma. Şimdi bütün bu şehirler evet küresel ağlarla bağlandı ama hepsinde de kutuplaşma görülmeye başlandı ve daha çok diğer şehirlere göre ağdaki şehirlerin ağdaki merkeziyetine göre de bu tür kutuplaşmalar aslında artıyor. Tabii bence bu tür niceliksel araştırmaların derinleşmesi, niteliksel araştırmaların bunlarda tamamlayıcı olarak yer alması gittikçe önem kazanacak ve biz de işte sosyal yapı, kültürel yapı, ekonomik yapı olarak bu tür küresel şehirlerin nasıl var olduğunu ve varlığını devam ettirmeye çalıştığını anlamaya çalışacağız. Son olarak da herhalde yani sunumlar yapılırken şöyle düşündüm. 2030 Birleşmiş Milletler sürdürülebilirlik kriterleri olarak da çok ilginç bir önerme getirmişler. Hiç kimsenin arkada kalmayacağı şekilde bir ekonomik, kültürel, sosyal kalkınma öneriliyor, sürdürülebilirlik öneriyor. Bu da sanırım işte bu küresel şeylerin önündeki en önemli maddelerden biri olacak. Teşekkür ederim.
Çok teşekkür ederiz. Şimdi ben salona dönmek istiyorum. Bizi sabırla dinlediler. 3 farklı grup var, bölüm var ve her bir gruptan da soru bekliyorum. Onu söyleyeyim baştan. Çünkü güzel bir zamanımız kaldı şimdi tartışmak için. Bir 20 dakika gibi bir vaktimiz var. Bu vaktimizi iyi kullanalım. Çünkü aslında önemli soru başlıkları çıktı bence. Özellikle tartışmacılarımızın ateşlediği konular var. Mesela biz hep yarışan kentler meselesini duyuyoruz yıllardır ve bir yarışta olmamız gerektiği içindeyiz ve o endekslere bakınca tüh 2 sıra aşağı inmişiz, 3 sıra geriye düşmüşüz gibi heyecanlanıyoruz. Yani bu ne demek acaba? Yani gündelik hayatta yaşayan insanlar için ne anlama geliyor? Biz şimdi iyi bir yerde miyiz? İşte gökdelenler yükselince çok mu ilerideyiz ya da sıralamada yükselince ekonomi çok daha mı iyiye gidecek? Yani gündelik yaşamda düşündüğümüz konularla bunlar çok kesişmiyor gibi görünse de aslında belirleyici oluyor. Yani burada bizim bütün tartışmacılarımızın ve sunum yapan hocalarımızın anlattıkları konu şu. Bunlar belirleyici. Evet, yani küresel dinamikler bizi belirliyor, yaşam biçimlerimizi ve kentlerimizi ve belki de yaşamlarımızı. Peki bu yaşamlarımızın kontrolünü biz bu bahsettiğiniz şirketlerden nasıl geri alacağız? Ya da bu sıralamalarda, üst sıralarda olduğumuz zaman acaba yaşam kalitesi açısından kendimizi nerede, nasıl hissedeceğiz? Bu soruları bence çok önemli sorular olarak duruyor. Şimdi salondan reaksiyon bekliyorum. Yani İstanbul için bu ne demek? Kendi yaşadığınız şehirler için, İstanbul dışında da bütün Marmara'dan gelen konuklar var burada. Kendi şehirleri açısından ne demek? Bu listede yer almamak mesela sizi nasıl etkiliyor veya etkilemiyor? Bunlarla ilgili görüşlerinizi merak ediyorum. Tabii ki her konuda açık. Soru veya katkı bekliyoruz. Evet, şimdi salondan lütfen alalım.
Vermişlerdi zaten herhalde söz istemiştim. Şemsi Ercan ismim. Şemsi Ercan, İstanbul Üniversitesi'nde Avrupa Birliği konusunda 14 yıl ders verdim. Hayatım ulaştırma ile geçti. Karayolu, demiryolu, yolcu yük taşımacılığı dahil. Şimdi bir Avrupa ile ilgili Avrupa Birliği'nin şehir ve çevre diye kitabı ve programı var. Yani anlatılanların hiçbirisi burada olmadığı gibi tam tersi şeyler var. Şimdi şehirleşmeyi sadece büyük mimari şirketlerin iş yapması olarak ele alamayız. Ele aldığımız zaman bunun eleştirilerini daha sonra gene belediye başkanları ve siyasi otoriteler yapıyorlar. Bir şehrin yeniden yapılması konusu bir kent politikası ile ilgilidir. Kent politikaları, şehirleşme politikası, urbanizm nasıl belirlenecek? İki, toplum politikası ile ilgilidir. Şehircilik politikası. Bunların bir sentezinin olması lazım. Ve burada görüyorum ki İstanbul Üniversitesi'nden yeteri kadar temsil yok. İstanbul şehri konuşuluyor. Daha evvel bir İMP, İstanbul Metropolitan Plan hazırlanmıştı. Metin Çancı, burada mı bilmiyorum. Hazırladı, yazdı. 200 mimarla birlikte plan durdu. Hiçbir şey yapılmadı. Çok önemli bir kentte yaşıyoruz. İki, çok önemli bir ülkede yaşıyoruz. Çünkü şehirleşmenin ya da şehir mimarisinin tarihi milletle başladı. Bu bölgede gelişti ve İstanbul'da burada çok önemli bir şehir. Sadece büyük bina değildir şehir. Şehir insanların yaşam alanıdır. Şehir ekonomik faaliyetlerin yaşam alanıdır. Mesela İstanbul'da hayatımın geçtiği nakliyat ambarları vardı, şimdi yok, yıkıldı gitti. Diğer düzenler yok. Nereye gidecek? Bunlardır. Bunlar konu olmadı. Sadece yüksek binalar ve kazanılan paralar. Ve büyük bir risk var. Biz sadece riskle beraber yaşamayı değil, riskleri engellemeyi de hesaplamalıyız. Biz sadece devrimci ya da evrimci değil, biz geçmişe de büyük bir sevgiyle olumlu değerlere sahip çıkmayı bilmeliyiz. Bunda başarmalıyız. Bu unsurlar çelişki değildir. Burada söylenecek çok şey var. 15 dakikalık vakti almamak için kesiyorum.
Tabii ki. Çok teşekkürler katkı için. Şimdi ikinci gruba dönüyorum. Bu tarafa dönüyorum. Buradan soru bekliyorum. Evet, arkada var.
Hello, I'm Rumeysa Nur from Istanbul Şehir University. Actually, I have one question for Professor Derudder. I'm very happy to see other Turkish cities on the list, especially Bursa, Gaziantep, and other cities. I'm just wondering whether you revised the definition of advanced producer services, because as far as I know, like these cities, the Gaziantep, Kayseri, and other cities, I mean the cities other than Istanbul and Ankara, they are very much based on the industrial services. I'm wondering whether you revised the definition. And actually, it's kind of a combined question, but as far as, if I understood correctly, Professor Aslı Ceyhan's presentation gives a global intelligence corporations. It seems to me that rather than, it's kind of dividing the advanced producer services, because as far as I remember, architecture was part of that services, but it seems to me it's a kind of a perspective, like rather than assembling all the companies under the banner of, under the label of advanced producer service, it's like kind of dividing it, right, putting a different sphere. I'm just wondering your views about this kind of a perspective. And if you allow me, I have one question for Professor Allan Watson. Although I read your book, and hearing from you was very enlightening for me, I'm just wondering how you see the state's role in all, like from these rich field studies, how you see the state's role. Because like to me, in the state's role in the book called Extraordinary Cities, the state was kind of always presented as a kind of constraining, like presenting the field for the global companies. But I'm just wondering how you get the experience about the state. Thank you for the remarks.
Okay, very good questions for all three presenters. Ben, you may start.
Well, thank you for your question. This is slightly odd to be talking to somebody asking a question at the back, so but I won't go like this all the time, man. So, okay. I think this is a very relevant question that has been important from the very start, because one of the things that dawned me over the years is actually the advanced producer services is not a standard term in economic geography or economic studies. Actually, our research group has been instrumental in coining that. Producer services obviously is a well-known category, and the other category that somehow overlaps and is more commonly used is knowledge-intensive business services. Now, the reason I mention this is not to throw terms around, but it does show you that there's no fixed set of definitions out there. And I remember in one of the most critical readings of our research, one of the common questions was, well, what makes advanced producer services advanced? There's no formal definition there, and it could be said that it's actually quite normative in the sense that it tries to single out what is cutting edge, what is really important, and the rest being straightforward, mundane, or trivial. That's not what we're trying to do, but the implication may be that implicitly you're foregrounding, making some network makers more important than they actually are, and that actually using the word advanced is a wordplay to somehow make that point without there being any conceptual basis for that. Now, what are advanced producer services? Well, if you forget about the advanced for a while now, and you focus on producer services or knowledge-intensive business services, they're much broader than actually the way in which we use this. We use it in a quite constrained, we use a quite constrained definition, and actually there's no real reason for that. The only problem, I think, is we don't have a line of defense for that, in the sense that why wouldn't you, for instance, include logistics firms? But I mean logistics service firms. I'm not talking about the firms pushing around the containers, but those that organize logistics, because they're also in key global cities. They're also an organizational element to the global economy. There is no firm reason for doing that. The only problem, I think, here is that once you start including other kinds of producer services, and most of them have some sort of rationale to it, so you add logistics, and then you might say, well, why not IT? And once again, not IT firms, but what is going on in Silicon Valley, for instance, because in a way, there's a lot of service providers there as well. And at that point, the question is, where do you stop? Okay, so we don't have a firm definition of producer services. I'm sure others could be added to that, but you would need have not only some sort of operational definition, but then also if you go to the selection of firms, are you going to include as many firms from each of the sectors? Because is accountancy more or less important than financial services firms? We have advertising in there. But if you're going to include as many advertising firms as you include financial services firms, that's probably not a good representation of the importance of the different sectors within advanced producer services. So I guess my point is that although I do understand that there's potential research issues there's no neutral or objective ways to circumscribe what the area is you're studying and how you would select different sectors as being part of that.
Thank you.
Okay, it's also, hi. Okay, so let me tell you how my perspective in this is. So there are transnational corporations. These transnational corporations does not have to be advanced producer services. They can be anything related from GM, I don't know, like General Motors, General Electrics, or any other production firms that are transnational. Advanced producer services are actually knowledge-intensive firms, and as Ben said, it has been it has been hard for the literature to define exactly which sectors fit in and which sectors do not fit in. But the important thing about them is that they are knowledge intensive and they produce some type of a connectivity, some type of a service between the transnational corporations, because their command and control functions needs to be very specific, needs to be highly sophisticated. So those are advanced producer service companies, and they're also transnational corporations since they are serving transnational corporations themselves. In my case, I needed to have another set of corporations, which is APS-TNC anyway, because it's design consultancy. But there, the important thing is like these companies actually do physical construction for the needs of APS-TNCs or TNCs. So that's why I found this GIC, Global Intelligence Corps definition, very, very helpful, just to define a specific sector, specific company within APS-TNC, which is design consultancy. So I agree, like rather than just maybe because of how the knowledge is developing, we are living in this age that knowledge is developing. We are hearing a lot of things about innovations. Maybe the APS-TNC, that big blob, I would say, will get more and more specialized. It has to get more and more specialized. That's my answer.
Thank you. Allan?
Hi. First, let me begin by saying thank you for reading the book. That was great to hear. So thanks for that. And thanks for the question. So it's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, I suppose I'm pleased that the question came forward in a way, because part of the aim of the book was exactly that, was to bring those types of actors back into focus in global cities research. So the fact that we're asking questions about state and city governance, I think, is really, really important. It was interesting that you mentioned the term constraint, the state as a constraint, and I think that's true. That's been a well-held perspective, and some might argue that it's a necessary constraint in the face of capitalism and commercialization and so on. So it does play an important role in that point. In fact, the point I want to make relates to the point this gentleman made down here, which is about this idea of the synthesis of urbanization policies. And I think local governance and state governance has a really important role there, because if you think about that coordination role in terms of the many private and public actors and organizations and firms that are involved in global city making, then the local government and the state government has a really important role to play in that coordination. Now, of course, that's extremely difficult. So there's a chapter in the book by a colleague, Marcus Hesse, on the maritime services in Hamburg, and he thinks about the tensions between, on the one hand, the notion of kind of focal firms, the fact that the city is trying to draw in and maintain and keep important APS firms within the city, but also to form what he calls grand coalitions of policymakers and firms into a kind of mutually beneficial relationship that works for both the city and for the firm. Now, that might be quite idealistic, I know, but I guess that's it would be my sense of the role of local government and the state is in coordination of those complex global city making processes.
Thank you. Şimdi üçüncü gruba dönüyorum. Bu tarafa bakıyoruz. Buradan bir soru rica ediyoruz veya katkı. Lütfen. Oraya döneceğim.
Özgür Sayın. Aslında ben kendimi Koray Hoca'nın sorduğu soru için hazırlıyordum ama siz erken davrandınız.
Ben sormadım. Sadece açmaya çalıştım.
Evet. Çünkü şöyle, muhtemelen benim çalışmalarıyla da alakalı olacak. Bu network çalışmalarına, özellikle lig çalışmalarına getirilen en temel eleştirilerden biri şuydu. Özellikle küresel güneyden gelen araştırmacılardan. Bu şehirlerin sıralanması ister istemez bir kazanma ve kaybetmeyi ima ediyor. Bu da daha tırnak içinde aşağıda yer alan şehirlerin yöneticileri için bir söyleme dönüşüyor. Biz şehirleri daha yukarı çıkaracağız ve çoğu zaman böyle bir pırıltılı slogana dönüşüyor. Mesela biz Afrika'nın dünya kentini yaratacağız. İşte şehrimizi top 10'a sokacağız vesaire gibi. Şimdi hem masada hem bulunduğumuz ortamda yerel yöneticiler var, araştırmacılar da var. Bence bunun için, bu tartışmayı açmak için çok uygun bir ortam. Yani ben ne der, yerel yöneticiler nasıl bakıyor? Bence bu konuda da biraz geliştirebiliriz belki tartışmayı.
Katkı için teşekkür ederim. Sunum gerçekleştiren hocalarımızdan veya tartışmacılardan cevap vermek isteyen veya katkı vermek isteyen olursa memnun olurum. Any contribution or comment on this?
Yep.
Okay.
You may close.
Okay. I think a couple of quick points related to that. First of all, I think when I talked about changing the research practice, looking at very different processes, in a way that responds to that critique in the sense that the critique you mentioned is, well, first of all, was a complaint about privileging some sort of cities and processes and other cities being seen as trivial, off the map, inconsequential, not living up to a standard. So, in a way, the diversification, the change in the research practices is basically showing that all cities are on the map, but they're just tied up in different processes. So, in a way, the change in the research agenda kind of speaks to that. It's not necessarily the main rationale for doing it, but in a way, seeing very different cities on the map like Nairobi or Piraeus somehow shows that centrality is an important feature of any city, because obviously, from my perspective, that's a problem with post-colonial thinking, in the sense that all cities are special. Okay, they're just special in very different ways, and we're not trying to. And this is why we diversify. We're not privileging by saying this is what matters. However, and then that's the second point. Obviously, this is not the only network that does exist, but it's important to stress that the research agenda, and the way in which it started, was a geographical understanding of global capitalism. Where is global capitalism being organized, coordinated, and decided from? And from that perspective, saying that it's organized from New York and London, and not from Harare in Kinshasa, is just alluding to the fact that there's such a thing as global uneven development. So in a way, the complaint that a city is on the map is not a research complaint. It just alludes to the fact that global uneven development still exists. So from that perspective, I think it's actually a misunderstanding or a misportraying of the research. That said, the problem is the rationale of the research is not making a ranking. But obviously the problem is a ranking is a very intuitive way to convey results. You can have maps and different things as well. But a ranking is what you put up there. And I think as researchers, we do need to be aware that obviously this is being picked up and used in very different contexts. Because if you read the different papers, nobody's talking in our papers about winning and losing. Obviously, rankings are taken out of context, and all of a sudden, we're number 12. What does it take to make number 10? And then as a researcher, I think our point, what we should do is actually somehow debunk that kind of myth that exists around this research and saying, hey, this is not what the aim is for. It's not a rat race. Okay? It's not like being in the top 10. This is not what it's aimed for. It's an understanding about where you are, and what you do with it is a different matter altogether. And the second thing, and this is the final thing I'm going to say about this, is also diversifying the research agenda back in other ways. And this is something Allan alluded to, is like, what are the consequences of this? Well, global network connectivity, our measure, if you would use that as an independent variable and try to explain the presence of low-income jobs and inequality, you have a predictor. That means that at the same time, you could have a presentation, and perhaps we should do that, is not just saying we have a ranking of global network connectivity, we have a ranking of inequality in the job market, because this is also what is being shown. And I think for local governments, as they ponder what this ranking means, actually being on top also means, in this case, meaning that you have a lot of low-income jobs catering to those high-end services. And this is also a part of the reality, not part of the reality, this is as much a reality as that one. And I think for us academics, it's important to make that point. Having said this, I haven't done this during my presentation. Let's say the excuse was I only had 15 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Thank you ben. O tarafa döneceğim. Şimdi ben de hiç söz hakkımı kullanmadım. Aralarda birkaç şey de söyleyerekten geçmek istiyorum. Tabii şimdi küreselleşmeyi konuşurken ister istemez yarışmacılık, rekabetçiliği konuşmamız doğal. Ama gezegeni düşünürsek ne olur acaba? Şimdi küreseli hep konuşuyoruz. Gezegen ve gezegen algısını hiç konuşmuyoruz. O bizi birleştiren şey aslında. Yarıştıran veya ayrıştıranı konuşuyoruz ama birleştireni konuşmuyoruz. Bu belki daha sonra, yani bu gezegen bilincine belki biraz daha ulaştıktan sonra bu sefer hepimiz için ortak olanı nasıl korumalıyız veya bunları nasıl ağlarda nasıl paylaşmalıyızı belki biraz daha fazla konuşacağız diye düşünüyorum. Yani belki biraz daha genişletmeli miyiz acaba düşüncelerimizi veya çalışmalarımızı diye düşündüm ben şahsen bütün bu tartışmaları yaparken. Çünkü aynı yerdeyiz, aynı tek bir dünyayı paylaşıyoruz ve buradaki her şey, bizi biz yapan, bizi ortaklaştıran her şey çok önemli. Bunun da belki bilmiyorum, ağlar içinde bir yeri olur mu olmaz mı? Onu daha sonra belki tartışırız. Şimdi hemen karşıya dönüyorum. 2 tane soru görüyorum oradan. Tamam, burada biraz daha kalabalık bir grup var. Katkı ise eğer veya soru ise de kısa almaya rica edeyim. Teşekkürler.
Ben Sezgin, Kırklareli Üniversitesi'nden geliyorum. Profesör Doktor ben Derudder'e sormak istiyorum. Geçen yılki toplantıya da katılmıştım. İstanbul 25. sıradaydı oradaki göstergelerde. Bu seneki göstergelerde 31. sıraya düştüğünü görüyoruz. Bunun nedenleriyle ilgili bilgi verirseniz teşekkür ederim.
Üzülüyoruz.
Well, I think the short answer to that is that if you look at it, on the one hand you have the connectivity measures, and the connectivity measures are then used to make a ranking, like London is the most connected city and so on. So I think from ranking 20 onwards, cities are really close together. It's like 50, and then the next one is 49.8, and then the next one is 49.6. And what that does mean is that if you make a new measurement, as we did in 2018, so this year is a small changes in the selection of cities and the firms and office opening up or closing down actually can change your connectivity with 2 or 3%, and that may result in rankings going up or down. So I think if you really want to focus on the ranking as a meaningful measure, you can only do so for top 10 or top 20 cities, because even the further you go down, the more spectacular this gets, in the sense that if you're at city 200, one office opening up, we'll see you jumping to 170. That sounds very spectacular, but it actually tells you is that our measure is very sensitive to small changes, and is also why you can't use the exact measure as something that is meaningful. This is only for the broad contours of where a city is located. So in a sense, there is no explanation in the strict sense. Perhaps there may be an explanation, a broader one in terms of change, but that would be too small a change to actually start digging into some sort of explanation.
Süremizin sonundayız. Size de söz vermiştim. Bu son soru oluyor. Lütfen buyurun.
Merhaba. Volkan Topçu bendeniz. Yalova Üniversitesi'nde öğretim görevlisiyim. Bundan önce de İstanbul Büyükşehir Belediyesi'nde 5 yıl süre boyunca çalıştım. Daha önce de yüksek lisans tezimi tamamladım. Küresel kentler ve İstanbul üzerine. Soru ve katkı tarzı bir şeyler söylemek isterim. Yerel siyaset veyahut da yerel yönetimlerle ilgili konuşuldu. Yaptığım çalışmalarda gördüğüm kadarıyla bu küresel kent sıralamalarındaki birincilik veyahut da geri planda olma meseleleriyle ilgili yerel siyasetçiler yukarılardaysa bunlar afişlere kadar, billboardlara kadar yansıtılıyor. Ama önümüzdeki sene, mesela bir sonraki sene bir düşüklük varsa bu hiç dile dahi getirilmiyor. Yani Türk siyasetinde mi bu sadece böyle? Uluslararası siyasette de bu böyle oluyor mu, yerel siyasette bilemiyorum ama veyahut da uluslararası yerel yönetim birlikleri veyahut da kent birliklerinde de mesela bir yöneticilik olunca başkanlık, başkan yardımcılığı gibi bunlar çok dile getiriliyor. Ama mutfak çalışmasında ne kadar var olduğumuz Türk kentlerinin bir soru işareti olarak karşımıza çıkıyor. Yani sahnede çok iyiyiz, çok katkılarımız oluyor ama mutfak çalışmalarında uzmanlık olsun, farklı katkılar çok katkı olduğunu düşünmüyorum maalesef. Ve aynı zamanda bir şeyin en büyüğünü yapmak, en uzununu yapmak yerel siyasetin dilinde çok dönüp dolaşıyor. Bunlar yerine yine niteliğini konuşmakta fayda var ama bu pek konuşulmuyor. Tabii bu küresel kent araştırmaları bir otorite sağlıyor yapılan araştırmalarda. O yüzden önem kazanıyor. Ve şurayla da bir şeyler söylemek istiyorum. Tabii bu küresel kent çalışmalarında sponsorlar oluyor ve çok kuvvetli sponsorlar oluyor. Bu sponsorlar eminim ki araştırmalara büyük katkı sağlıyor ama bu büyük sponsorların, uluslararası firmaların, şirketlerin katkıları araştırmacılara, araştırmanın gidişatına dezavantajlar da getirdiği oluyor mu diye sormak isterim. Ve kent politikaları mobilitesi diye bir şey var bildiğimiz üzere. Coğrafyacılarımız da çok iyi bilir. Bu şehircilik politikaları özellikle küresel kentleri, kentleşme deneyimi, yeni kentleşen, kentleşmeye yeni açık ülkelere önemli bir yerel diplomasi, kent diplomasi anlamında çok kuvvetli bir know-how oluşturuyor. Bu yeni süreçlerde daha iyi tartışılabilir mi diye sormak isterim yine. Uzun oldu biraz. Teşekkür ederim sabrınız için. Sağ olun.
Kime sorduğunuzu da sorabilir miyim? Herkese mi sorayım?
İsteyen cevaplayabilir. Teşekkür ederim.
Ben başlayabilirim. Ben şöyle cevap vereyim. Bu hani World City Network derken networkleri kurmak için özellikle spesifik bir metodolojiden bahsederken hani bu Globalization and World Cities'in kullandığımız bu APS-TNC, Transnational Corporation'lar üzerinden bir okuma yaptık. Ama buradaki araştırmacılar dahil hepimiz katılımcılar küreselleşmenin iki boyutunun hatta belki daha fazla boyutlarının olduğunu çok iyi farkındayız. Onun için de zaten sanırım Allan'ın yaptıklarında yani qualitative work daha nitel araştırmaların öne çıkmasında bunların da öne çıkacağını düşünüyorum. Küreselleşmenin birçok yüzü var. Bizim şu anda yaptığımız bir yerden bir okuma ama bunun birçok okumaları var ve o da gitgide daha çok entegre olmak zorunda diye düşünüyorum.
So you guys? Alan?
Yeah, there are a number of interesting points I think that you raised there, but it's really, I guess, just emphasises the point that I was trying to make about the importance of qualitative research in that particular context. So Andy Pratt, for example, in the case of creative industries, talks about kind of Xerox policy or the transfer of policy from one place to another in a way that may not suit local context. I think there are two things there. The first of which is who is doing that transfer, why is that transfer happening, how does that transfer happen, and that all happens through particular agencies and particular individuals. And I think the other thing there is understanding the local context and understanding why those policy transfers may or may not work in particular contexts. But if we don't understand those local contexts particularly well, both as researchers and policy makers, then I think, you know, much of that policy is inevitably going to fail. But just takes us back to that importance, I think, of that kind of grounded qualitative work.
That's right. Stefan, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, maybe some last thoughts of mine. As a quantitative, explicitly quantitative researcher, I could not more acknowledge your statements, Alan, and the questions you raised or the comments you made. Because the general approach of the globalization and world city research is or has been to very rough, very coarse grain produce a picture of what's going on in the global system. But you can't at the same time come up with solutions for all individual single node. So this is where qualitative methods can really help and should help, and quantitative methods are not very helpful in this respect. So,
thank you very much. Eklemek istediğiniz bir şey? Cemil Bey? Sizi bitki yapmayacağız merak etmeyin. Buyurun.
Çok teşekkürler. Öncelikle ben Derudder, Allan Watson, Aslı Ceylan Öner, Eda Aslı Yücesoy ve Stefan Haneman. Çok teşekkür ederiz katıldığınız için. Son derece nitelikli bir dinleyici grubuyla bu kadar hakeme ihtiyaç duymadan konuşan hocalarla ayrıca konuşmak son derece yararlı. Elimdeki sarı kartlara hiç ihtiyaç kalmadı. Demek ki bundan sonra yeşil kartlar taşımak gerekir. Murat Güvenç hocamızı görüyorum bu arada. Hoş geldiniz hocam. Çok teşekkürler. Son derece verimli bir toplantı oldu. Verimli bir oturum oldu. Ben tabii başkanımıza da çok teşekkür ediyorum. Birkaç gün önce seçilmiş olan başkanımız ve bir büyükşehir belediye başkanının ne kadar yoğun olduğunu hepimiz biliyoruz aslında. Lütfetti, nezaket gösterdi. Bu arada şu ana kadar da muhtemelen akademik geçmişi sebebiyle de bu tartışmayı dinledi ve girişte cesaret verici konuşması için de teşekkür ederim. Sadece fırsatı bulmuşken şu son sözü söyleyeyim. Her seferinde söylüyoruz. Marmara Belediyeler Birliği'nin 3 kırmızı çizgisi dışında hiçbir kırmızı çizgisi yok. Tartışmaların sadece sakin ve saygılı bir dille ve bilgiye dayalı bir içerikle etik kurallara uygun olarak yapılması konusunda 3 tane kırmızı çizgimiz var. Onun dışında hiçbir kırmızı çizgimiz yok. Ne konu, ne siyasal tavır, ne şey. Dolayısıyla lütfen bizi eleştirin. Lütfen bize önerilerinizi gönderin. Lütfen gördüğünüz yanlışları söyleyin. Lütfen kurumlarınızda, başka yerlerde sakladığınız ne kadar eleştiri varsa bize yöneltin. Bütün eleştirilerin gereklerini yapamıyor olabiliriz. Fakat her bir eleştirinizi gözümüz gibi koruyacağımızı, başımızın üstünde taşıyacağımızı, kendimizi geliştirmek ve eksiklerimizi görmek için dikkatle okuyacağımızı garanti ederim size. Çok teşekkür ederim. Buyurun hocam.
Ben de çok teşekkür ediyorum. Oturumu kapatıyoruz. Bundan sonraki oturumlarda daha çok yerel yönetimler ve sahadan çalışmalarla devam edeceğiz. Çok teşekkürler katıldığınız için.